Teresa Skubic, and this is Forum Daily for Monday, January 5th. Former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife were brought to New York on Saturday after a dramatic U.S. military operation in Caracas in the early hours of the weekend, parts of an unprecedented campaign by Washington to seize the country's leader. U.S. forces captured the couple during coordinated strikes and transported them to a federal facility in Brooklyn. U.S. President Donald Trump said in a press conference over the weekend that the U.S. would run Venezuela temporarily during the transition.
We're designating people. We're talking to people. We're designating various people, and we're going to let you know who those people are.
What's the group you mentioned that would run Venezuela?
Well, it's largely going to be, for a period of time, the people that are standing right behind me. We're going to be running it. We're going to be bringing it back. It's a dead, I talk about a dead country. Venezuela has a lot of bad people in there, a lot of bad people that shouldn't be leading. We're not going to take a chance that one of those people take over for Maduro. So we're going to have a group of people running it until such time as it can be put back on track, make a lot of money for the people, and give people a great way of life.
You said earlier today that you weren't going to back Machado to come back and be the opposition leader in your Fox and Friends interview. And then you also mentioned the vice president of Venezuela. Are you going to work with the vice president of Venezuela, or how do you foresee the relationship going?
I understand she was just sworn in, but she was, as you know, picked by Maduro. So Marco's working on that directly. He just had a conversation with her, and she's essentially willing to do what we think is necessary to make Venezuela great again. Very simple.
And on Sunday, U.S. President Trump warned Venezuela's interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, of a big price to pay if she refuses to cooperate with the U.S. following the dramatic capture of Nicolas Maduro. The Trump administration stated it is willing to work with Maduro's remaining government, provided Washington's goals, especially access to Venezuela's vast oil reserves, are met. Venezuela's vice president responded saying the country is ready to defend its natural resources.
Se activa toda Venezuela y el decreto que ya fue suscrito por el presidente Maduro, único presidente de Venezuela. Hay un solo presidente en este país que se llama Nicolás Maduro Moro. Y suscrito el decreto, estamos procediendo en este Consejo de Defensa de la Nación a entregarlo a la presidenta del Tribunal Supremo de Justicia para su respaldo constitucional debido en la Sala Constitucional. Todo dentro de la Constitución. Lo aprendimos del comandante Chávez frente a las vicisitudes, frente a los golpes de Estado, frente a los sabotajes petroleros. Nosotros estamos listos para defender a Venezuela. Nosotros estamos listos para defender nuestros recursos naturales que deben ser para el desarrollo nacional. Hoy el pueblo venezolano tiene una muy alta conciencia de lo que significan sus hidrocarburos y de lo que significan sus recursos energéticos.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in an interview with NBC's Meet the Press that the United States is not at war with Venezuela, adding that the U.S. is running policy in Venezuela not with troops on the ground, but through financial leverage on the remaining allies of former President Nicolas Maduro.
There's not a war. I mean, we are at war against drug trafficking organizations. It's not a war against Venezuela. We are enforcing American laws with regards to oil sanctions. We have sanctioned entities. We go to court. We get a warrant. We seize those boats with oil, and that will continue. We will continue to reserve the right to take strikes against drug boats that are bringing drugs towards the United States that are being operated by transnational criminal organizations, including the Cartel de los Soles. Of course, the leader of that cartel, is now in U.S. custody and facing U.S. justice in the Southern District of New York, and that's Nicolas Maduro. So we made a big progress in that regard.
He also suggested that the United States would not take a day-to-day role in governing Venezuela other than enforcing an existing oil quarantine on the country.
Yeah, I mean, I keep people fixating on that. Here's the bottom line on it is we expect to see changes in Venezuela. Changes of all kinds, long-term, short-term. We'd love to see all kinds of changes. But the most immediate changes are the ones that are in the national interest of the United States. That's why we're involved here, because of how it applies and has a direct impact on the United States. Okay, we are not going to be able to allow in our hemisphere a country that becomes a crossroads for the activities of all of our adversaries around the world. We just can't allow it. We can't have a country where the people in charge of its military and in charge of its police department are openly cooperating with drug trafficking organizations. We're not going to allow that. These things are direct threats to the United States, and we intend to use every element of leverage that we have to ensure that that changes. The one I would point everyone to is that our military is helping the Coast Guard conduct a law enforcement function, which is not just the capture of Maduro, but the enforcement of our sanctions. We go to court, we get a warrant, we seize the boats. And we think this is tremendous leverage, incredible, crippling leverage, which we intend to continue to use until we see the changes that we need to see that are benefit to the American people. And by the way, we believe to the people of Venezuela as well.
But while aboard Air Force One last night, Trump reiterated that the U.S. is currently in charge of the country.
We're dealing with the people. We're dealing with the people that just got sworn in. And don't ask me who's in charge, because I'll give you an answer and it'll be very controversial.
What does that mean?
It means we're in charge.
Have you spoken with her?
We're in charge.
Have you spoken with her?
No, I haven't, but other people
Do you want
have.
to?
Yeah, at the right time, I will.
Nicolas Maduro and his wife appeared before a judge today in New York at noon. The ousted Venezuelan leader faces charges including narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, and weapons offenses. Maduro has long denied any involvement in drug trafficking and pleaded not guilty. I sat down with Eric Garcia, the D.C. bureau chief with The Independent, who walked us through the debate over congressional approval and what the process of approval is supposed to be.
Yeah, so according to the U.S. Constitution, Congress has the sole authority to declare war. It is not constitutional for the president to unilaterally act, and the few times that, or there needs to be a declaration of or an authorization of the use of military force, or on top of that, the Senate needs or Congress needs to vote on the War Powers Act. None of these were done. The president did not even inform Democrats or members of Congress, Democratic members of Congress. Before this, the president supposedly said that he didn't want to do this because Congress tends to leak. Well, guess what? Unfortunately, that's the Constitution. You're supposed to inform Congress. But the real question now is, what is Congress going to do about it?
Eric also provided what the reaction has been in Washington to Trump's move over the weekend.
So Democrats are understandably livid. They're understandably very angry that this is just a unilateral military action, no declaration of war, no declaration of authorization of use of military force. But Republicans who control both houses of Congress are logically going along with it.
And now that Maduro is in the U.S., Eric unpacked the charges being laid against him and the potential penalty.
You know, he's being charged. What's interesting is that the Trump administration has talked, well, I'll talk about fentanyl from Venezuela. The indictment actually doesn't mention anything about fentanyl. He's charged for possession of weapons. He's charged for cocaine charges, but nothing really about fentanyl. And I think that's he could spend a long amount of time in prison if he's found guilty. But again, this is on such flimsy legal grounds and such flimsy legal territory, and really kind of uncharted legal territory on top of that, that it makes it very difficult to say what's going to happen next.
And with the question of who is actually running the country being up in the air, we discussed why governing is not being handed over to Maria Machado.
Right. So there are multiple news reports from the Washington Post and the New York Times saying that essentially the Trump administration didn't believe that they had an actual feasible governing plan. On top of that, Maria Machado was prohibited from running, I believe. So was Edmundo Gonzalez, who is considered the rightful winner of the 2024 presidential election in Venezuela. So, but it seems like the Trump administration it's simultaneously saying we're going to run the country, but then also saying that Delcy Rodriguez, I believe his name is going to be running it. So, and then on top of that, there's talk about Marco Rubio and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, what he's going to be doing. So it's really not clear who's running Venezuela at this moment.
When speaking to a British broadcaster on Sunday, former MI6 chief Sir John Sawyers described the U.S. raid in Venezuela to capture President Nicolas Maduro and his wife as a real stretch legally. He also urged caution in using the term regime change, noting that the Trump administration was simply dealing with the regime.
I'd be cautious about using the phrase regime change. The Americans have abducted the leader of Venezuela, Maduro, and taken him to the US to stand trial. But they are now already dealing with the regime. The army remains in power. The legal structures of the regime remain unchanged. And they're already talking to Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president who's been sworn in as the new president of Venezuela, and distance themselves from the opposition. So this isn't the sort of regime change of the sort that we saw in Iraq, and is commensurate with the clear reluctance by Trump to put large-scale forces on the ground. He wants to deal with the existing regime. What they're relying upon is U.S. domestic law enforcement, and the use of military force to protect those carrying out the what they would see as a lawful arrest. Now, for us, that's a real stretch legally. It wouldn't have passed muster here in the UK, but Americans are a law unto themselves, and in some ways, this was an assertion of American power.
Coming up after the break, protesters in Ottawa were calling for the federal government to support the right to self-determination for the Venezuelan people. We'll have this story and more news after the break. As a number of countries condemn the ouster of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro by the United States, protesters in Ottawa were calling for the federal government to support the right to self-determination for the Venezuelan people and for the U.S. to back away. Dozens of protesters gathered in front of the U.S. Embassy steps away from Parliament Hill on Sunday to denounce President Donald Trump's actions in the country that extracted Maduro and his wife from their home in a military base in Caracas this weekend. And Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada stands by the Venezuelan people's right to decide and build their own future in a peaceful and democratic society. Canada has not recognized the illegitimate regime of Maduro since it stole the 2018 election. Carney said this on a social media post Saturday evening. He continued by saying that the Canadian government therefore welcomes the opportunity for freedom, democracy, peace, and prosperity for the Venezuelan people. The Prime Minister added that Canada has long supported a peaceful, negotiated, and Venezuelan-led transition process that respects the democratic will of the Venezuelan people, and it calls on all parties to respect international law. I'm now joined by our contributor, David Clement, to break this down further. David, thank you so much for the time.
Not a problem.
Now, President Trump has said that the U.S. will run Venezuela temporarily. Under international law, what does that amount to? Intervention, occupation, or something else? And is that even allowed?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. We still really don't know what run means. What we know right now is that the vice president, who was selected by Maduro, is essentially acting as the president. According to Venezuelan law, if that means anything in this scenario, she would have 30 days from the moment she's sworn in to basically call for a new election. So is it occupation? No. It could be more of observation to ensure that that process happens as it's supposed to. But I think the bigger question, and if you really speak to people on the ground in Venezuela or anyone in the expat community, the major concern here is the fact that someone from the Maduro regime is at the top still. And for so many Venezuelans, this was a tyrannical dictatorship, but they don't want anyone from the Maduro regime anywhere near government again. And there is a government in waiting. We know that Maduro lost the last election. And so this is where the Trump administration needs to be clearer in terms of what's next, is showing the world that there may be a gap in time between getting from A to B, but the ultimate goal of getting to B is either new elections or acknowledging the government that won the previous election.
Now, Marco Rubio came out yesterday and said that the U.S. is not running Venezuela, but shortly after, President Trump came out and said that they were. If that wasn't the overall goal, why are they not allowing Machado to have the power?
I mean, that is a great question. So it's complicated because Machado was the front runner who was then barred from running. So a different gentleman kind of ran in her place and won the previous election. And so these are some of the logistics of you don't want to just install somebody as the new leader per se, but they have to figure out what does this look like. Are they going to have to redo an election cycle so that Venezuelans can reaffirm their choice and then have that be their government? The disparity between Rubio and Trump, I think, is just it's just poor word choice. I don't think that there's any type of gap really between the perspective of either Mr. Rubio or President Trump. But like I said, it really just comes down to when the administration, the Trump administration, is going to say clearly what happens next and when. Because right now, the biggest looming question is why is there a Maduro loyalist running what's left of Venezuela's government?
And could this operation set a precedent for how the US deals with other governments in the future? I mean, China and Russia have both come out and said that the United States' decision over the weekend was not a good one. So is this giving China and Russia the green light to pretty much do the same thing that Trump did?
China and Russia already gave themselves the green light for things much worse than this. I mean, it is rich hearing complaints about international norms from the likes of Russia and China. I mean, Russia is still bogged down in their invasion of Ukraine. I mean, China just within the last 2 weeks said that they were going to reunify with Taiwan and did a full naval blockade exercise. So threatening to annex the country of Taiwan into China because they perceive it as being part of one China. So it is rich for them to basically bang the drum of international norms or international law, given that they're some of the most egregious violators of it. But what I would say is there has been some clamoring about whether or not this emboldens China and Russia to act out. And I would actually argue that it does the opposite. It acts as a deterrent. So much so that the officials in Taiwan praised um, praised the move of getting Maduro for a couple reasons. One, because around 60 to 70% of Venezuela's oil exports go to China. So they could potentially lose, the Chinese could potentially lose a major source of oil, which is what you need in a war. It also showed that the air defense systems, whether they be Chinese or Russian, that were supposed to be impenetrable, used by the Venezuelan government and military, were easily defeatable and easily defeatable. Making nabbing a dictator in his pajamas in a matter of an hour or two is an incredible feat, and they basically showed the world that whatever systems the Venezuelans were using were not going to be sufficient. And so I actually think that there's a strong deterrent factor here that will discourage the likes of Russia and China to behave erratically or do things that the world otherwise wouldn't want them to do.
And what role, if any, do the United Nations or organizations of American states have at this point?
Well, I think observers are realizing that those are largely toothless organizations. Unfortunately, um, there is the UN and the OAS didn't do anything when Maduro stole the last election. I mean, there's a very obvious reason for that. The first obvious reason is that Russia and China are on the Security Council, and they were allies of Venezuela because Venezuela was acting as a gas station essentially for some of the most egregious and adversarial countries out there. Um, and so the UN couldn't do anything, wouldn't do anything. The OAS was in the same boat. So I don't know if there's really any role for them here at all. But again, it just comes back to the specifics and the details of are is the Trump administration going to hand over the keys to the government that already won the last election? Or are they going to create a process to re-solidify and acknowledge that government winning? And that may mean another election. But we really have to get to that point where we know for certain what is happening next.
Well, and Canada said that it supports the Venezuelan people's right to decide their own future. What does that actually mean in practical terms right now?
Well, it means that Canada is trying to walk a very fine line of saying, we like that Maduro is gone, and we're not really going to comment about how he was taken. Um, and I think that the what was interesting about Carney's first statement after this happened was that it was something like 15 hours after, which is really strange because we have long not acknowledged the legitimacy of the Maduro government. And so it was trying to walk a fine line and saying that the Venezuelan people deserve uh, democracy and freedom, while not going so far as to say we commend Donald Trump for taking Maduro in the middle of the night in his pajamas. But it is in contrast to Pierre Polyev, who was very far more forthright in terms of saying, yes, this is a good thing. And I think what a lot of people are missing in these conversations about international law and international norms and all of those things is that more than 20 million people were just freed from a tyrannical dictator. That is a good thing.
But
They have had the boot of a tyrant on them for decades, and now they have the opportunity, hopefully, to rewrite the rules for them.
and David, we just have a bit of time left, but how risky would it be for Canada to support self-determination while its closest ally appears to be doing the opposite?
Well, they're not as far apart as one might think. It just really just depends on if the U.S. is hell bent on actually running Venezuela. That would be problematic, and that would be another area where Canada and the U.S. would be at odds geopolitically.
Well, David, thank you so much for the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll have more of today's top national and international headlines right after the break. We'll be right back. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky says he's appointed former Canadian Cabinet Minister Chrystia Freeland as an advisor on economic development, pointing to her experience in attracting international investment. In a post on social media, Zelensky said Ukraine needs to strengthen its economic resilience, both to support a fast recovery if diplomatic efforts move quickly and to bolster the country's defenses if the war drags on due to delays from international partners. Freeland, who has Ukrainian roots, served as Canada's deputy prime minister from 2019 to 2024 and has been one of the most outspoken critics of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And families in the Northwest Territories bring home more money on average than anywhere else in Canada, but that doesn't mean everyone there is getting ahead. New data from Statistics Canada shows that in 2023, the average household income in the territory was just over $102,000. That's more than $10,000 higher than any other province or territory, and nearly $28,000 above the national average. At the same time, the Northwest Territories also recorded the second highest poverty rate in the country, highlighting a sharp gap between those who are doing well and those who are struggling. And a dramatic and unprecedented weekend in Venezuela has sent shockwaves well beyond the country's borders, following a major U.S. operation that upended the political landscape in the country. The fallout is already being felt in global markets, diplomatic circles, and among key allies, including Canada. As world leaders weigh the consequences and investors react to the uncertainty, questions are mounting about what this means not just for Venezuela, but for the stock market. To break down what this means, we're joined by Brendan Caldwell, director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you. I'll push back just a little bit before we get into the questions. It's not entirely unprecedented. About 30 odd years ago, 35, Bush 1 did this to Manuel Noriega in Panama. So they have done it before, and it won't be the first time or the last probably America has gone on to regime change. But sorry, your questions.
Well, no, and as you've mentioned, we've seen this before. So let's start with what happened in Venezuela over the weekend and what economic impacts could we potentially see and what did we see in the past? As you've mentioned, it's happened before.
Well, so what we saw apparently was that the United States went in and forcibly extradited the president of Venezuela and his wife, which is a very bizarre thing. I guess they want the wife for leverage or something. I don't know. But they've been handcuffs and earmuffs and blindfolds. We've all seen the picture of the Venezuelan president on the USS aircraft carrier, and apparently they're in New York and being indicted there. So of drug charges and different things. So it's a big thing. I mean, the Noriega extraction was not nearly this neat. So kudos from a tactical perspective, but strategic, global, I think it raises quite a few doubts.
And how did the markets react to what happened?
They're up. it's it's as though they haven't really noticed or think this is vaguely positive. And it may be. I mean, Venezuela has been a failed state now for decades since its moved towards socialist populism. It's just that at this time and in this climate, yeah, I don't want to go down too far down that road, but the market has not reacted negatively. Perhaps the market's thinking with America does in fact get oil flowing again, because Venezuela used to produce about 8 million barrels of oil a day. One of the biggest oil producers in the world, and has a tremendous gold reserve and lots of other resources as well. And all of that has ground to a halt as mining and energy production have not been reinvested in and have just deteriorated. So now they've gone from 8 million barrels a day down to 1 million. So if they can expand production again somehow, perhaps that makes for cheaper energy and makes it easier on the economy, perhaps.
Now, and before the new year, you and I actually talked about the surge that we saw in gold in 2025. What implications could gold face due to the conflict in Venezuela?
Well, I mean, gold is still going to be, I think, a real store of value. I say real as opposed to crypto, which, as we talked about, Bitcoin and the other so-called cryptocurrencies had been soaking up a lot of the money that wanted to bet against government-issued currency, fiat currency, so to speak. So if you wanted to bet against the US dollar, you could buy some Bitcoin. And for quite a few years, that has been proved correct. It's gone from, in 2009, from a few $100s a coin to peaked out at about $120,000 a coin, but of course it's pulled off considerably from there. But gold is having a bit of a resurgence here as more and more countries are looking for alternative reserves to either the US dollar or crypto. So they're going back to the oldest form of value storage there is, bar gold.
And what are the implications for Canada?
Of the Venezuelan, I think
Yeah.
there's a few. From a purely economic perspective, Venezuela and Canada make similar types of oil, heavy oil. So what is known as the oil sands up in Alberta, Fort McMurray area, is a lot of heavy oil, which the U.S. has geared itself to process. And they've been, the U.S. is buying more of our oil, which is part of the reason I think that there's been a reluctance on the part of the U.S. and various activist groups to allow Canada to have a blue water export market for our heavy oil, because it just comes in cheap to the U.S. Well, if Venezuela becomes another viable source of heavy crude for the United States, it may further reduce the price of Fort McMurray oil as a possibility. But again, I think it'll be a minute before that energy becomes on stream, assuming everything stabilizes in that country. And it's given the chaos over so many decades, I think that may be a minute. Politically, I think it makes Venezuela has been almost tarred with, I won't say it's been tarred with the same brush as Canada. They haven't been bombing our ports recently, but it does make a point that I think Canada should be aware of, that the United States and President Trump in specific are prepared to actually follow through. Trump's been tarred with the brush of taco. Trump always chickens out. Well, apparently he hasn't chickened out in this particular case. And one of the reasons, allegedly, is that the Venezuelan president was seen dancing, mimicking, and making fun of President Trump's dance moves. And well, he can dish it out, President Trump can, from a verbal abuse perspective. He ain't so good on taking it. And he takes any slight very personally. We saw that with our previous prime minister, who spoke nicely to Trump in person and then trashed him behind his back. Unfortunately, the microphones were on. So I think it would behoove Canada to mean what we say and say what we mean, and for our leaders to be straightforward with Trump and not take sophomoric pleasure in making fun of him, because I don't think there's any upside to it other than a momentary smarmy, I don't know, pleasure, I suppose.
And what could this potentially mean for the world? I mean, I know it's still early and everything is still being figured out and discussed, but what could the potential implications be?
I have long thought that whatever I think is a bug in the world is actually somebody else's feature. To compare small things to great. In my hometown here in Toronto, everybody complains about the traffic, traffic. Don't politicians know what they're doing about the traffic? Well, of course they know what they're doing. It's intentional. What we think is a bug, bad traffic, is actually a feature for those that are planning traffic patterns, because they want fewer people to use cars. They want more people to use public transit. Whatever you feel on the issue, what I think is a bug is actually a feature. So for a bit, I'd been thinking the last few days, well, this is a terrible thing, because it normalizes a country acting in this kind of aggressive way, this very aggressive way, in its own sphere of influence. In the case of America, the North American, South American, Western Hemisphere. But then I'm thinking for a second, wait a second, what if this is what the president and America actually want, is to normalize this? What if they're really saying, in this world, there is America, Russia, and China, and within our respective spheres of influence, we should have some latitude to do what we would like. And when I saw the cameras around London years ago, in London, England, I thought 1984 was meant as a cautionary tale, not a how-to novel or a how-to manual. And so here we are. In 1984, there were three power blocks that controlled the whole world: East Asia, Eurasia, and Oceania, which was the one that the protagonist, Winston Smith, inhabits. And they roughly correspond to the Western world being Oceania, East Asia being China, and Eurasia being the Russian bloc. And these three controlled the whole world. And that really does seem to be the message that we're being sent, that each of these power blocks has their own sphere of influence.
Well, Brendan, thank you so much for the time. As always, we appreciate it.
Thank you, Teresa. I hope the actual outcome is more optimistic than the one I'm painting. Happy New Year and a great 2026 to you.
Coming up after the break, the Toronto Blue Jays have officially signed Japanese infielder Kazuma Okamoto to a 4-year, $60 million contract. And Team Canada fell short at their shot at a gold medal in the World Juniors with a loss to Czechia. We'll have this story and more of today's top national and international news after the break. We'll be right back. There are now more than 20 recall petitions in Alberta, including one against Premier Danielle Smith. Many Albertans are frustrated with the current UCP government and want to see certain MLAs recalled. A grassroots organization called the AB Resistance is behind many of the petitions. The group's founder, Mark Tokar, tells our Western Canada Bureau Chief Hal Roberts where many of their frustrations originated.
So, Mark, how did your group AB Resistance come to be anyway?
We started ABR in, I believe it was December of 22. And we started taking registrations in my DMs in what was in Twitter. That's how we started.
Now, you're a lifelong conservative, were you not?
I was lifelong. My family, I grew up conservative, yes.
Now, I recently interviewed Premier Danielle Smith and asked her who she and some of the other UCP members thought was maybe behind this movement here. She says, in fact, it might be the unions and the NDP who are involved and want to bring down the government. Your thoughts?
Okay, that makes me smile. When we started this group, it was to inform people on what was going on politically day to day with sourced information, and to encourage them to contact their MLAs if they had concerns. We did that for a number of months and just kept hearing there was nothing for feedback. So we pivoted then to educating people about their right to recall, their democratic legal right to recall, and went from there. We are a TPA. We are a political TPA. Our books are open. We have over 10,000 members now, and they are from every political affiliation.
Mark, what are some of the major issues you feel have not been addressed and why you want to see a number of MLAs recalled?
Well, as I said, we talked to our membership about contacting their MLAs and talking to them about their concerns. And there were a lot of real concerns. We had we had thousands of emails go in. We had people trying to get meetings with their MLAs and without success. There were a lot of people that got responses to emails that were very rote. We got some that were very rude. And so we pivoted them. That's when we pivoted to educating about recalls. We just felt that they were not representing their constituents. And that's how the constituents felt too.
Now, to recall an Alberta MLA, Mark, you need signatures from about 60% of folks who voted in that specific riding during the last provincial election. And those signatures must be collected within 90 days by approved canvassers. 60%, that's a pretty tall order. Where are you at now?
We have 23 recalls going. We are in touch with every recall. And not because we initiated any recalls. We did not do that ourselves. People came to us. The first recall was Jenny Yeremy. You might be familiar with her. She's done quite a few interviews. She's Calgary Bow and is recalling Demetrius Nicolaides, the education minister. And Jenny was actually on our board when she finally got a meeting with the minister. She was actually thrown out of his office. He got up in her face, told her to leave his office and never come back. And when she came back, she just said, I have to leave the board because I'm going to start a recall. So, and that was what started that movement of the recalls. She filed, and then we had, of course, then we had the teacher strike and the notwithstanding clause. And it was like a tsunami. It just kept rolling. People said, okay, we can do this. We have an option to do this. So that's, and I want to disabuse any notion, any idea out there that either our group or unions or the NDP have had any part in initiating, organizing. Nothing. They have had nothing to do with recalls. As a matter of fact, I can say honestly that the NDP want to stay as far away from us as they can. They don't want to be seen as being involved. Unions, we have had some involvement with unions, but only after recalls started.
Mark Tokar, founder of AB Resistance, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me, Hal.
The Toronto Blue Jays have officially signed Japanese infielder Kazuma Okamoto to a 4-year, $60 million contract, the team announced on Sunday. Okamoto, a 6-time All-Star in Japan's NPB League, had his signing widely reported on Saturday. The 29-year-old third baseman and first baseman hit 15 home runs, 49 RBIs, in 69 games last season for the Yomiuri Giants, despite missing over half the season due to an elbow injury. Okamoto is expected to play primarily at third for Toronto. And while the Blue Jays were adding a new face to their future, one familiar chapter was coming to an end nearby in Buffalo. As the 2025-26 NFL regular season wraps up for the AFC East, the Buffalo Bills closed out their campaign the same way they began it against the New York Jets at their longtime home. On Sunday, September 30th, 1973, the Buffalo Bills opened their brand new football facility, Rich Stadium, with great production from O.J. Simpson and the Electric Company to grab a win against the New York Jets. Now, more than 5 decades later, the Buffalo Bills decisively beat the Jets in the final game in the same stadium. Next season, Buffalo moves across the street to the $2 billion Highmark Stadium, but fans got one last chance to celebrate at the old venue. with over 70,000 in attendance witnessing the team wrap up the season on a high note ahead of the playoffs.
For 53 seasons, man, we have called this place home. I would say my favorite part of the stadium, it always starts with the fans. For me to play football and to look around the stadium and to see people that are paying their hard, worked for money to come and watch us play ball, it is the most beautiful thing that an athlete could see.
So you ever just look at the fans, like just looked at them? You ever just like took a second and look at them? Prettiest thing in the world.
The memories in the stadium they're endless, but the snow game was by far one of my favorites, man, because I'm the snowman, and it was just perfect. It was almost like it was too good to be true. And LaShawn McCoy was our running back. He goes right behind me and Richie to the left of the football field, to the sideline, touchdown, hands up, Sean McCoy dance. And that moment right there is when I knew, I was like, I'm where I'm supposed to be. You have dreams playing on the big stage, and in this stadium, you have Jim Kelly, you have Thurman Thomas, you have Bruce, right? You have Andre Reed. And then you connect that bridge like, man, I was once one kid dreaming of being one of those players. I think that that's one of the most coolest things that I could ever say about this stadium, because for us to be able to share this football field with those guys, it's greatness.
For the third straight year, Czechia prevented Canada from winning gold at the World Junior Hockey Championships.
Now McKenna gathers it back up. Here's Benek the other way for the Czechs. Feeds it after Curran moving in. Curran with a chance. Prevailing but they score! With 1:14 to go, the Czechs have retaken the lead. Max Curran in front appeared to get the last touch. And is this the third straight year that the Czechs have scored late on Canada?
The Czechs beat Team Canada 6-4 on Sunday night in St. Paul, Minnesota, and will go on to face Sweden for the championship match. Canada will face Finland for the bronze at the men's under-20 tournament. For the first time since 2016, Canada and the U.S. will not play in a gold medal game in the World Juniors. Canada's head coach Dale Hunter spoke to reporters about the team's performance.
What was the difference tonight?
We gave up too many goals, and it's playing our heels a bit, but we got battling. We battled back a couple times on them, and we got to play better defensively.
What makes the Czechs a difficult opponent?
Oh, they're a good team, though. They got some good players out there, and they got good structure, so they'd be good. So two teams battling, and it looks like the last goal is going to, whoever scored the last one is going to win. So it was one of those games.
What's the feeling in the locker room with those guys right now?
Well, they're down, and it's tough, but that's hockey, guys. You got to be a pro about it, and you got a game tomorrow.
What do you think of that call at the end, the goalie interference? It seemed like the guys were pretty frustrated, obviously. How did you see it?
Well, I don't know. It's a ref calling it, so it's whatever the ref thinks, guys. He got the last say, no matter what I say.
It wasn't a best game of your team out of
Yeah, we should have played a little bit better, but sometimes you're not as good as you should be. But I liked we had a lot of chances in the second. We had a real good second period. We should have scored more.
What was the impact of Brady Martin's injury?
Well, it always hurts when you lose the top six, but we got a lot of good forwards there. So again, we had guys replace them that are good players. So we were depth. It was good.
I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Good night, Canada.